G'day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to episode 2 of Adelaide Conservatives. As always, I'm joined with Luke Munro. Luke, welcome back, episode 2.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, it's great to be with you. And a few good things we're going to talk about today. Obviously, during the week, we observed International Women's Day, which is a fantastic thing. It gives us an opportunity to recognise the important women in our lives and appreciate all the things they do for us. And and also one of the things I did notice that was quite amusing was the fact that so many people posting on social media about International Women's Day that I really think would struggle to define what a woman actually is.
It's been a bit of a point of contentious for over the last couple of years. It's funny that I even have to say that, isn't it?
No, it's ridiculous.
What is a woman has become a point of contention. So talk to a bit about it. I mean, you put a post up on Facebook during the week that got a fair bit of traction from people talking about it.
Yeah, definitely.
What was your thought process around that?
Well, I put it up there obviously to recognise the important women in my life, but I guess I couldn't help myself with pointing out the bleedingly obvious that there was a whole heap of people posting about it that in the past have, when asked if they can identify a woman, skip around it and just make a mess of trying to describe or define what a woman actually is. So I did that, and obviously I got a fair bit of response from it, and had a bit of fun with it.
Yeah, most of the posts that I saw up online were celebrating women in leadership positions, particularly political leadership positions.
Yep.
But of course, that's not what International Women's Day started for or is about. International Women's Day is to celebrate all women and the important role that they have within the family network and all the things that comes with that too. It's not just about leadership in a formal way. There's other ways that people are contributing to our society.
Yeah, well, I think the issue with that is that, yeah, you're dead right what you're saying there, but the people that really get excited about it, from the left I'm talking, that celebrate Women's Day and anything woman when it suits them, that's not really what it's about to them. It's there's another agenda when it comes to talking about women's, whether it's pay gap, this mysterious pay gap that apparently exists out there, or a lot of other sort of left-leaning issues. That's what it's really about. It's not really about celebrating what it is to be a woman, because I think they've really got a problem with the actual traditional definition of what a woman actually is.
Yeah. The subject of pay gap and the discrepancies between male and females paid in the workforce is one that I know the left will point to a figure and will use that as their absolute gospel around where the gender pay gap comes from. But there's so many different factors that come into it, and how you measure it can be dissected in about 30 different ways. And they're very selective with the data that they're using.
Well, let's be real. Yeah, there is a pay gap if you map it out over the course of a woman's whole, or the average woman's whole working life. And there's one key factor that causes that pay gap, and it's the fact that they have children. And I just think that's something that successful women, a lot of successful women that dedicate their lives to their careers and maybe don't have children, there's a real resentment, I think, there for the fact that that's what most women want to do. And that's why the end total, once they retire, is generally less than a man. And I think that's just a reality that a lot of people on the left can't come to grips with. And a lot of women, like my wife included, chose to stay at home with our children. And yes, at the end of her working life, she's probably going to earn less money than I have. But that was her choice. She wanted to do that. And as a family, we're really grateful she did. But the fact that there's going to be a pay gap, I mean, that's just doesn't make any sense to me. It's irrelevant to our family.
I also find it interesting when you look at, for instance, of a family perspective, they do separate it into the male earnings and the female earnings.
Yep.
I certainly know within my family, I don't look at it that way at all. We share money. We have a shared responsibility of our children. We live under the same house. We do all these things. And quite frankly, I could not have done the amount of work that I've done in the last few years without the support of Ash and her work at home with the kids, doing all the fantastic work that she does at home to allow me to earn that income. So to me, that's joint income. We're a team. We're part of the same venture together, and it's probably the same in business.
No, it's exactly the same. Basically, obviously I was building businesses and sort of, I guess, building for our future, which is why it made sense for my wife wanted to stay at home with the kids when they were younger. I don't look at it as I don't have a spreadsheet out there to go, okay, how much did you earn? How much did you contribute? How much did I earn? How much did I contribute? We're working as a team, and I think that's lost on a lot of these woke lefties that want to bang on about this pay gap. Pay gap's there, like I said, because women have children.
I think when you look at the individual job, and everyone does this, so when you see it on the news and in the media, you hear about these stats, but everyone tends to then relate it back to their own personal life. And you think of the women in your world, the ones that are choosing to go on and have careers, generally really successful at what they do because they've made that decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when they apply themselves like anyone else, they can achieve some really great things in the workforce if that is your goal. It just happens to be that the majority, for at least a portion of their career, have different priorities. And it's something we actually should be really grateful for.
Yeah, and when you look at some of these politicians that want to bang on about it, really, there's probably a lot of built up resentment there from some of these female politicians because the reality is a lot of them have had children, and yes, that has hurt their ability to rise the ladder in politics, but that's just reality. That's life. That's a decision you make. No one's forcing you to do that. You make that decision. But yes, biologically, the women are the ones that can have the children.
Yeah, and it does make a huge difference. And with that, biologically, too, there's a different temperament, not as its entirety, but as a percentage when you look at it. The type of workforce that a female may be attracted to will be very different to what the stereotypical male is. And yes, there's people on the, not the extremes, but there's, a high proportion of them. Doesn't mean that males don't go into nursing. It doesn't mean that females don't go on to become engineers, but as a percentage of the entire collective group, it does funnel people into those careers.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and look, but I think I think that's a really, really small part of that pay gap stuff that they bang on about. That's a small part of it because there are plenty, I suppose, menial, low-paying jobs that a lot of men do as well. It's not just women that are working in hotels and working in childcare and doing those sorts of things. I think that's a small part. The real part, I think, is that gap where women do tend to take that time off.
Yeah, no, 100%. The other hot topic at the moment that has been spoken about a lot within our community is the voice to Parliament.
Yep.
Now, I think a lot of people at the moment are getting a little bit confused about what is the voice to Parliament. And
I was hoping you could tell me.
Well, I think it depends on where you live and which voice you're talking about. So, obviously, the one that has all the immediate attention at the moment is the federal government's voice to Parliament, which they're going to try and make a constitutional change to bring it into the constitution of the country, where the state-based one, particularly here in South Australia, is a legislated version of, which there is being legislated. There's more framework around what we know about it. And I've studied each one a fair bit. Obviously, local governments, they have their version of. So I know when I was
Aboriginal Advisory Board and all that.
Yeah, on Karingui, the First Nations People Advisory Board. And when you look at the three different setups, there's some positives about each one of them, but there's also a fair few question marks that I think really need to be addressed.
Well, yeah, look, you sort of started off with asking about what the voice really means to people. And I mean, I've tried to study it too, and I'm struggling. I follow a lot of politics, and I listen to what the politicians say on both sides, and the more they talk about it, the more confused I become. What are we really trying to do here? If it was something that we were going to clearly see a benefit to Indigenous people, and they could outline and basically sell what that benefit will be, then I'm all for that. But I'm not seeing that. All I'm seeing is another layer of bureaucracy coming in, and it's going to be a voice of the few, not the whole, as far as Indigenous people are concerned. So we're talking like 42 positions, I believe, in the federal voice. I mean, that's 42 positions. There's 100 plus nations of Indigenous people in this country. So who's going to get the voice? That can't even be explained. They're talking about having it basically people being nominated. So we're not going to have a democratic process for the people selected for the voice. Those things just aren't really clear. And when you've got that much murkiness around it, I think it's dangerous.
Yeah, I think the biggest risk is bringing politics into Aboriginal affairs. That shouldn't be the guiding factor. When you speak to a lot of local Indigenous leaders, even the southern suburbs here, they are very conscious that their culture is being forced into the Western system, which is not how they operate. and putting it so formally in, as you said, the question marks is, if it's a selection process, well, who's doing the selecting? How do you make sure there's no political interference here? Because let's be clear, at the end of the day, if there's a voice to be heard that has benefit in a political spectrum, all parties will try and influence it over time. That's just the way politics works. How do you keep it separate? You can't.
Actually, you touched on something there that, for a lot of Indigenous people, and I know a few of them personally that I talk to a fair bit about this sort of stuff, and they do talk about the fact that they don't really understand it themselves, and they feel like they're being pushed into, to use their words, a white man's system, which they don't understand.
Yeah. Well, you look at the South Australian model that has been passed now through state parliament, through the upper house at least anyway. That is looking like it's going to pretty much dissect South Australia into 6 electorates, which will be voted on from First Nations people.
Right.
It appears that, take the South Australian Adelaide model, which will have Kaurna, Ramangiri, Ngarrindjeri, a few of the other clans around, all into one.
Yep.
Well, if that's going to be an election, it appears that you can decide if you vote in where you live. So you might be someone from a tribe in northeast Queensland. If you live in Adelaide, you can vote in that section, or you can choose to be a voting member of where your original clan is from. Now, the problem with that is, if what you're trying to do is get the local perspective and the local knowledge, under the Aboriginal system, they have an elder system of government. And if the elder is putting their hand up, and they could be losing an election to someone who was from WA or the Northern Territory, well, the voice then becomes a popularity contest of who lives there and it's more majority, rather than getting the local knowledge and the local perspective from the custodians of that region of the land, which again is it goes against the purpose of what they're trying to achieve.
No, that's right. And I mean, when you look at different Indigenous advisory groups, and you see this right across the country, like there's a fair bit of nepotism involved in them as well. So and that's because they essentially are a monarchy in themselves. Now that might be controversial to say, but that's the reality. They are basically a monarchy. Elder passes on to the next person. It's sort of like a pass-on effect through the leadership. It's not an elected body in any of these nations. So, what they're trying to do, I think, is just going to be problematic.
Yeah, and again, having an electoral system, there's no right answer, because, again, like I said, if you nominate someone, well, who does the nominating? That seems risky.
Well, it'll be an elder, so then you've got that risk again of nepotism, or Uncle Johnny's a good bloke, so he's going to get that seat in Canberra or that seat on North Terrace or whatever it is. I mean, like.
And then, if on the alternative, you go to the election based, you're putting people up against each other from their own communities, and anytime you have any sort of election, that comes with friction. That's how politics works. Friction comes when you run against each other for elections.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Most Indigenous communities don't work that way, and I think that's a problem in itself. They don't work that way because they do have that elder system. So what? Yeah, two-edged sword really. They're trying to implement a system where they have to follow potentially be part of a Westminster style system, being in the Parliament, which isn't natural to a lot of the elders. But on the other hand, they're going to allow them to run it in, I guess, an old tribal way of selection by the elders, and it's like I just don't think the two go together.
Yeah, I think you also risk an inner city voice emerging when and I'm not sure how the federal model is going to be, because there's absolutely scarce detail about it. So I'm just going to talk maybe about the way the South Australian
we're
system
guessing
works.
a little bit especially with the federal one. I mean, we've got an idea with the South Australian one, but there's a lot more questions around in and around the South Australian
And if the
one.
federal one works similar to the state one, well, the inner city areas is where the built-up population is.
Yeah.
So, like I said, South Australia will be cut into 6 sections. If you happen to be part of a mob that is included in with the Kaurna people, well, that's where the majority of the votes will be.
Yeah.
So if you're a Ngarrindjeri, Ramangiri person, the chances of you being able to win that election, have your voice heard, is
Pretty minimal.
diminished.
Yeah.
But your voice is just as important as someone who will be from any other clan, just because you happen to be running against an inner city thing, and that will bring inner city thinking.
Yeah, but that's federal politics as it is now.
Exactly.
Let's be real. Like
Yep.
you've got you're in a city, very comfortable, generally wealthier people are making all the decisions for the rest of the country, and that's the system we have now. And that'll be no different in any sort of voice. And I mean, the next thing too with that voice is, what's the qualifying factor to vote? Like, are they going to go by like the three pillars that they claim now, as far as the qualifying, like, identity, what I got, identity,
Acceptance from
the
mob.
all that sorts of, like, are they going to go by those pillars, or like what's the qualifying factor to being able to be on this panel?
I think it was asked in one of the federal committees by Senator Antic. He asked that question to, I think, the minister and the bureaucracy who was sitting there answering the questions. There wasn't a clear answer. In fact, I don't think they had an answer to that.
Oh, yeah, it was something like, we're going to go by departmental guidelines or something, I think was basically what the answer was, which, I mean, if you go by departmental guidelines, I qualify.
Yeah.
This very small percentage that I'm Indigenous, I qualify. I've never really identified that way, but if I choose to identify that way tomorrow, I qualify.
Yeah. And look, I've known you for quite a while. It's a story you've shared with me a little bit in the past. It's not something, you've never sung that from the rooftops before or used it in any way. It's not something you shy away from either. You're still, I mean, the reason why you found out is because you're interested in your family history and how it is. And it's a part that you're proud of. It doesn't mean that it's going to be your sole identity. And
no.
And the irony of it is that you can see that if you'd have put yourself up for one of those boards or committees, well, you'd almost feel, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you'd feel like you're taking that position away from someone
I'd feel like a complete imposter. Because,
exactly.
Well, look, first and foremost, I think we should all, number one, identify as Australians. So that's what we are. We are Australians. All this I identify as Indigenous, I identify as this, that, and the other. I mean, that's all rubbish. We're all Australians. And that identity stuff altogether, that is so divisive, and that's why we have the problems we have. Is like, we're all Australians. Let's be Australians, number one. And that stuff can be important to you, but don't let it be the whole defining factor of who you are.
Yeah. I think America, for all its woes, does have a better balance of that. They always identify them as American first, and then they'll have their different, whether they're an African American or they might be a Mexican American or an Asian American, whatever their subculture may be. They tend to see themselves as American first and foremost. Although that has been changing a little bit. But I'll let you keep talking. I'm going to grab a drink as well. You keen for a drink?
Yeah, go for it. But look, one of the things that I did notice, just watching the Super Bowl that's just gone by, we're talking about Americans and identity that they have with their own nation. What was really telling was the fact that African American players were crying when the Star Spangled Banner was being played, as well as white and probably Hispanics. I'm not going to identify them by how they look, but just if you look at the general cross section of the players, that they all, regardless of their racial background, had tears in their eyes to the Star Spangled Banner. And I think that's a fantastic thing that the American system has developed, and we're really missing it. We're missing that pride in nation.
And I think we should be more proud than most countries in the world. Even compare yourself to America. We are so lucky to live in such a safe and community-minded country that we have so many great benefits that happen with being an Australian. If you want a job in this country, you will get a job in this country.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You can walk down the street at night feeling pretty comfortable in most places throughout the country. We are immensely lucky to live where we do, and the freedoms and all the things that come with being Australian. It's something we should be all proud of.
Look, I'm just going to put it out there, and I think most people that'll be watching this will share the same feeling. But I've travelled the world pretty immensely. I've been to a lot of places, and we are the greatest country on earth. The Americans claim it, but I think they're a distant second to us as far as being the greatest country on earth. Like, wherever you go around the world, you come back to Australia, and there's like a sigh of relief, with just the systems that we have in place, just the level of wealth that we have. Even if you're struggling, you're generally going to find a feed here. You're generally there's systems in place that'll look after you, which they don't have in most countries around the world. And it's kind of funny when you hear people whinging about Australia and, Australia's a racist country, Australia's this, that, and the other. We're the most open country on earth. Like, where else on earth do you have a melting pot of different cultures that have come together so well, and aren't wanting to kill each other in the streets? I mean, this is a great country.
Yeah, I think nothing sums that up more than if you were to head to the city tonight and you went to get a feed.
Yep.
Where are you going to a restaurant? We don't have our own
Oh,
culinary experience. You go.
I've got
You
the
go.
barbecue, mate.
Yeah. Well, the barbecue is probably as close as
Yeah,
we can get,
yeah.
but
The Americans might claim that too, though.
they might. But if you're going to go out for a feed in the city, you're going to go to a Mexican, Italian,
No,
a
nice
Chinese, an
Argentinian place
Argentinian.
in there, which is good. Yeah.
And I think the fact that we are that big multicultural country that has come from every part of the world, and we don't have that identity of a culinary sense, we're the best eating in the world because everyone accepts all different types of things, and we enjoy all the different experiences.
Yeah, no, and we've got that. And look, I mean, there's a few countries, like United States has that to a degree. New Zealand's very similar that way. But yeah, we are very, very lucky. And I think people going around, chanting for war and all this sort of, like Lydia Thorpe types and all that sort of thing, they really need to have a look in the mirror because they've never had it so good.
It's remarkable that, I don't know, when I look at people like Senator Thorpe or people that are saying those type of catchphrases,
Yeah.
I take a step back and go, do they actually believe what they're saying, or do they know what they're saying is going to be front page of the Advertiser or making news
it's
that night?
probably deliberate provocation, but it troubles me that there's a lot of people that
will follow that as
follow it and really think there's some underlying evil about this nation. And I mean, it's just a nonsense.
And it's that the difference of, you have a different policy viewpoint to me, so I'm going to say that you are a racist and a bigot.
Yeah.
Or rather than going, okay, we're all here because we love our country, we love our community. You see,
Some of them don't. That's the problem.
and that is
the problem.
and it's growing. So
Most people, and I'm not just talking about people that are centre right, conservative like we are. I'm talking most people, even that are centre or centre left. Most members of the Labor Party love this country.
Yes,
It's just that far fringe of the Labor Party, the Greens in particular, that there's a real, it's just a real poison.
Was there a comma in there between the far left of the Labor Party, the Greens, or was that a continuation?
No, they're one and the same. They just sit in a different party room. But yeah, they're poisonous. I think as far as our nation's concerned, as far as the future of our nation, that those people are. I mean, yeah, they have a right to have a say. We're a democracy, but people have to be really cautious, I think, of the extremes.
And I think one of the best questions that can be asked about here is, where is the end point? So, everyone says as a country, we're on a journey.
Yeah, I thought you were talking about the extremists. Is that
No, I am. So
Yeah.
we're on a journey of reconciliation, and I think what highlights it the most is the Australia Day debate.
Yeah.
Because I'm becoming more and more convinced, and over the years I have ummed and ahed, and I've thought in my own head going, I'm always a big believer that the 26th is the best day to have it on. And there was always a little part in the back of my mind that went, geez, I wish everyone could celebrate this day. I'm sick of all this nonsense. Can we just change it so we can actually get on with celebrating the country that I love? But then when you sort of take one step back from that, you go, well, no, because as soon as you do change the date from the 26th, the Lydia Thorpes of the world, the Greens, the far left of the Labor Party will start coming out and attacking that day for celebrating Australia as we are now.
Oh, they'll never be happy. And that's the trouble. That they will never. The far left will never be happy. Every time it's a slippery slope theory. Every time you change something, they'll want more. Like, you can pick a day, and then they won't want it to be called Australia Day. They want it to be called Sorry Day, or they want it to be called something else. Like, you're never going to win. And I think, or I guess that's why we're conservatives. We want to conserve those things that unite us as one. Now, for a small percentage of people, Australia Day might be offensive, and that's fine. I mean, there's plenty of days out there that are offensive to me as well, but you live with it and you go on with it because it's important to someone. Vast majority of Australians, Australia Day, 26th of January, is very important to them, and we're trying to, or we look like we're going down the path of changing that to placate basically a loony mob.
Because if you want to change the date, and on that new date you want to celebrate this great country that we live in, there is no shying away from the fact.
They don't think it's great.
But
that's the problem. They don't think it's great.
Yeah, but
that's
this
the
is what they'll still say when they're that their mouthpieces are out there trying to sell it in a more polished version of what they actually believe. That's what they will say. But if you want to celebrate Australia for what it is, then you can't shy away from the fact that on the 26th of January, the boats arrived. We started the nation. That was the beginning point of what we have today. Whether you want to celebrate that or not, we would not have the country we have without that moment in time. And when you celebrate Australia, that is part of that history. That is part of the story. That ain't going to change. That's always been part of our story.
Well, it is part of the story, and I mean, like you look at there's not a country on earth that doesn't have some sort of horrors in their history. I mean, that's history. You can't erase history. You can't, and by changing the day or changing the name or something or whatever you want to do, you can't rewrite history. Bad things happen. That 99% of us that are here now, our ancestors had absolutely nothing to do with it. So you can't change that. And I think that just highlights what a great country we're in. That with all the wealth and all the opportunities you have in Australia, they're whinging about this. Like, I mean, what a great country where you can have people out there, whether you like it or not, being able to whinge about these things when they majority of us, by world standards, live in a lap of luxury.
And I think we said it on last week's podcast. These topics tend to come up more during good times.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think there's a famous quote where they do talk about that bad times create hard men.
Yep.
Hard men create good times.
Yep.
Good times create soft men.
Yep.
Soft men create hard times.
That's a great saying. I thought you were going to quote Winston Churchill again or something, but no, you didn't that time.
I didn't that time. Give me time, I might go again.
Yeah.
But essentially, when you have a look at that from where we are at this standpoint, these things started creeping themselves into last year's federal election. But on a world stage now, there is things going on that have such a more high priority than the things that we talk about on a weekly basis when times are going great, and how do we improve these little things here and there.
Yeah.
When you're looking at war in Ukraine, you're looking at the rise of China and their absolute tenacity that they want Taiwan back. When you're looking at the world economy, when you're looking at insurance rates that are going up and up and up and up, how palatable will this agenda, whether it is the voice to Parliament, whether they start pushing harder at a referendum to become a republic, these things become less important when times are hard. And when a government focuses so much on these things and they're leaving behind the economy and people are struggling to pay their mortgage, they're struggling to pay their power bills because we want to shut down every coal mine under the sun, well, people get pretty sick of it pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. Well, look, the COVID was a classic example. COVID breaks out, and it was like the only good thing about COVID was that I didn't turn on the TV and have to see something about climate emergency. Greta Thunberg went missing in action. I didn't hear anything about inequality between Indigenous people, white people, pink people, black people, whatever. All that went away. All that went away. All that went away suddenly because there was something that was perceived as a real crisis, which wasn't, but it was perceived as a real crisis, and all those problems went away. And that sort of goes to exactly what you said. Did
you see during the last fortnight, I think it's been on the news, that Greta Thunberg was out protesting against a wind farm?
Yeah, I did see that. That was somewhere in Norway or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, because it might affect some of the native. I think it was in Canada. Was it Canada or Norway?
I thought it was Norway. But anyway, she was somewhere on a climate crusade, probably flying first class to get there.
Flying first class to get there, saying, you can't say on the one hand this is an existential threat to mankind. Climate change is going to ruin us all. If we don't do something now, you have to, the blah, blah, blah. Oh, don't put it here because it's going to affect the local people. Well, hang on a minute. That's having your cake and eating it too. And it probably highlights that she's become such a mouthpiece for the left. We shouldn't be surprised that it's changing from climate change to different issues now. The evolution of Greta will be interesting as she gets older.
Well, that was the evolution of the Greens. The Greens, when they first came out, actually gave a shit about the environment, and they cared about the environment. And then the true agenda came out in the 90s, where they evolved basically into socialists, which is what they are.
I know a lot of economic conservatives who voted for the Greens in the early days because they do have such a love for the environment.
Shame on them.
And a care for them. But I tell you what, I think that they've been fooled by where that party actually is.
Yeah, I think those people probably stopped voting for him about the time Peter Garrett got involved.
Yeah.
I reckon.
Oh, I think a lot of people stopped voting when Peter Garrett got involved.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to be interesting going forward from here now to see how the federal government apply these type of policies at a real level. I think one of the biggest question marks is, what does this country look like if The Voice fails? Because remember, with a referendum, being a federation of states, you need every state on board. So a lot has been spent on the yes campaign.
Yep.
What does a no campaign look like? What's the minimum you need?
You need a
say
majority.
no?
You need a majority. So you need 4 out of they basically need, my understanding is you need 4 out of 6 states to carry it. Now, that's probably questionable whether that'll even happen. But here's my prediction for the future.
So it's a majority of states, not a majority of voters.
Yeah, majority of states. It's a majority of states.
Yeah.
So if my prediction is it'll just fail. So I think there'll be enough. I think they're going to struggle to get it over the line in Queensland. I think they'll probably struggle in New South Wales as well.
So what you need 4 states.
4 out of 6 states.
What about territories? How do they?
They don't come into it.
So the territories don't have a vote on a referendum.
No, I don't believe so.
That's fascinating in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'll have to check that.
Yeah, we'll double check that, but I don't believe so.
But we'll take that out of it. For now, you need 4 states to say no for this to lose.
That's correct.
I would say, if I was running the no campaign, I'd be spending money in Queensland.
Well, they're not getting money. That's the problem. Yes campaign's getting all the money, which I don't. I mean, back when they had the referendum in 1967 to allow Indigenous people to vote, each campaign got equal amount, and 98% of the population voted, which rightfully so, to allow Indigenous people to vote. But each campaign, out of good spirit, got equal funding. We're not seeing that this time around.
Well, you got to remember, a referendum is there to make a constitutional change. So if you're going to say, if you want to change our constitution, there's not like either way you vote on this doesn't mean you're a bad person. It is saying we're trying to put a change out there that's been proposed by the government. What's your thoughts? And if you don't fund both sides equally, then actually I think you're a big risk of losing the Australian people because they're going to say, hang on a minute, don't use my money to tell me how to vote. I can vote the way I want. If you're going to spend taxpayers' money or taxpayer rebates in advertising campaigns, which essentially is saying you need to use my money to put an advert on the TV to tell me how I should vote out of my own conscience. Now, the Australian people...
That's exactly what's happening.
The Australian people will see straight through that and they'll vote against it in the majority of states.
Yeah, and look, back to my prediction. My prediction basically is I think it'll fail. Not by a lot, but I think it will fail, and it will fail because of the lack of detail, the lack of information for people. Not because people don't want the Aboriginals to have a say or to have the selected few have a say. It's because of the lack of detail. And then what I think you'll see, this is my bold prediction is, I think you'll see the Albanese government legislate it when it fails. I don't think he's going to waste all that money on this referendum when I think he's got every intention of legislating it anyway. Which
is what he should have done from the get-go. If he could have taken that to an election to legislate it, the good thing about the legislation versus a constitutional change, and we've seen this with Aboriginal policies and departments throughout history, some do really well and some fail badly. If you put this in the Constitution and it fails badly, well then it's so much harder to remove a constitutional change than it is to amend legislation.
No, that's right. No, they want it constitutional so that it's more or less set in stone.
It's enshrined into the Constitution.
That's why they're doing it. Like this is the big hurdle, and then if that fails, then they'll go legislation.
Yeah,
guarantee it.
And one of their spin doctor lines that you will hear time and time again during this year and during this campaign will be that our First Nations people need to be enshrined in our Constitution. It is an absolute abomination that they are not in there at the moment. Don't let that spin change the fact that
does it matter?
But
does it really matter to the average Aboriginal person? Does it really matter?
I
mean, it's just it's a bunch of words.
Yeah.
Is it really going to change Aboriginal lives by changing a line or two in the Constitution? It's not going to.
But it's also disingenuous to the fact that you're saying that we need to put Aboriginal people in the Constitution. Well, you don't have to do that with putting a voice to Parliament. You can put them into the Constitution. That's completely irrelevant to the voice to Parliament. These are two very separate things.
No, that's the Trojan horse.
And is there currently a voice to Parliament? I think the answer is yes. You have a look at a few of the departments and agencies.
11 members of Parliament that are Indigenous. I mean, if anything, they're by percentage of population, they're overrepresented, which is great because that's democracy. They've been selected by their peers.
I actually think it's a sign that people say, is Australia a racist country and all these sort of things. It's a great example that our democracy is working.
It's not even a question.
Our democracy is working because we have 11 members of Parliament in both houses of Parliament that identify as Aboriginal. And they are there because they have been elected on their merit from their communities as a whole to represent them. And that is an over-representation compared to the proportion that they make up of the community.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
So you cannot have that in a country if the country is racist, you do not see that. It is impossible to put those two things together and say that we have a racist country, but we're going to have 11 members that identify as Aboriginal.
There would be 160 or 70 plus other countries out there that would not have anything like that. That majority of countries out there, their parliaments are represented by whoever's in power's friends or factions. That's how most countries on earth work.
And I think the biggest thing to me is it highlights why a voice to Parliament is a bad thing, because if you're saying a voice to Parliament, what you are saying is all Aboriginal people think the same way.
No, that's right, and that's what we alluded to before with all the different nations. So this federal voice, are you telling me, where we live, it's Kaurna land, are you telling me there's going to be a Kaurna person in that voice? I wouldn't have thought so. It's a very, very small nation of people compared to many other nations in the north of Australia.
But even within the Kaurna community, so you just look locally, and I saw this during my time in the mayor's role at Onkaparinga, is on issues, you don't have consensus within the one tribe. So Kaurna people will be for a certain project.
Normal groups of people.
And they'll be against because they are humans and they are individual thinkers. And to say that these people aren't individual thinkers and they can't, you're going to have conservatives and progressives and people that have the whole range of ideas that come within that. And to say that they need a voice to speak for them, I think is an insult to the integrity and the intellect of First Nations people in this country.
Oh, look, I think it's very insulting that they're being told by their left-leaning masters that they must have this in place because that you can't run your own affairs unless you have people representing as part of the voice in Canberra. We won't trust you to run your own affairs at home, but we need this body in Canberra, which just it seems ridiculous.
Because there is nothing stopping the federal government in creating a committee that looks into issues that are directly...
There's already several of them.
There's already several of them.
Yeah.
And I see, again, I'll talk about the First Nations People Advisory Group on council. So when I was there, if something came to council, the way it was set up is council had a committee, the First Nations People Advisory Committee, which the elected members set the committee. So they approve that the mayor would be on it, and you would have two councillors that are voted on by the council. And then you would have your First Nations representatives. So you'd have someone from the Kaurna community, someone appointed by Kayak or one of the other Aboriginal groups. And council so it was council's remit.
So is the current mayor on that committee?
I think she's chosen to. I'm not sure if...
Okay, I was of the understanding she wasn't in support of that committee.
I've heard the same thing, which is the irony within itself.
Yeah.
But that committee, the way it's set up is the council can refer a project for advice from the advisory committee. And that committee will be made up of, as I said, elected members and First Nations people. So it's not that all things. The committee doesn't choose what it talks about. Council will go to advice from that committee, and the elected members, after meeting with the First Nations group, will report that back to a council meeting on a topic that they sought advice for.
Right.
It was put in through a notice of motion. Therefore, any motion can change or adapt how that committee works at any time with the membership. And that can work well in those type of situations, because the things that you would put to the committee would be things that you knew you would spend a lot of money on in other reasons, and you'd put out community consultation, you get nothing back until you start constructing. And then when you start constructing, everyone complains, and then you spend all this money trying to consult at the end of a project. You could get in there early, spend less money, engage early, and then have an outcome that works for everyone. It's not this, everyone has a say, but there's different levers. And
It just sounds like a massive layer of bureaucracy.
It does, but at least in that system, the elected members hold the decisions as the elected members. They're the ones who are making the decisions. It is all completely on them, and it's once removed from the chamber. So it's not this group that are reporting to the chamber.
Yeah, not a veto power as such, is what you're saying.
The group is reporting to a committee that reports to the chamber through the elected members. So the democracy holds true, and they only work in certain areas, and it's not, it's not something that can be, you can repeal it any time you want.
Yeah, right, okay.
So maybe that is one thing that they could do right now without doing big constitutional changes and all these things. They have, in fact, that's how the federal government works. That's how that works right now.
A lot of areas, yeah, it's already there.
That's how they work right now. So to say that there's not a voice,
no, it's
voice.
Nonsense, absolute nonsense.
No. Perfect. All right. Well, I reckon that's good for episode 2.
Done. Easy. That's a wrap. And, we'll be back in a week's time with another episode, and we'll
some big names coming on shortly too that we can probably start announcing. One who we've locked in for an episode,
Alex Antic.
Stay tuned.